Luna Park was created in 1912 by American showmen James Dixon Williams and the Phillips brothers, Herman, Leon and Harold. James Dixon returned to America the following year, but the brothers remained until their deaths.
Those gentlemen were almost pseudo-parents to me, because of course I was down there. I couldn't stand being at school. I was at school at Wesley, but not concentrating on my work, and all I wanted to do was be either a theatre manager or a projectionist. So I spent many, many, many happy hours down there with Albert Wright, who was in that bio box of the Palais for over 40 years.
The Phillips were essentially German Americans, and I think that had a great bearing on their careers and their characters. I think that gave them the efficiency of the Germans and the showmanship of Americans, which was a pretty powerful combination when it came to the entertainment business. They got so much up and running, they came to a country that they would have known absolutely nothing about. Yet they built up this huge empire involving picture theatres in Melbourne and Sydney, Luna Parks in Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney dance halls. I believe they're involved in film distribution. They built up this incredible empire, but yet they're rarely mentioned in any of the showbiz histories.
They were really they were the Beau Brummels, if you like. They certainly didn't play that up, but when I think about it, they had beautifully tailored suits, probably from America. Suits that really, the likes of which you really didn't normally see in Australia. But of course, that wasn't the only thing that the Phillips brothers brought to Melbourne. They brought that American show business flair. Although, of course, they were primarily businessmen, they certainly brought that wonderful show business feeling to St Kilda.
In the early days of amusement parks in America, they had a very big component of live performance. There was a lot of live acts. Acrobats, jugglers. They would have, for example, a high wire act, and there's some film getting around of a high wire artist doing his trick, I think coming from one of the towers into the top of the Chateau Dodgem building at Luna Park. And in fact, when he reaches the end of his journey, the guy who darts out from the shadows and grabs him happens to be my grandfather. So that was his one moment of glory on film as far as Luna Park was concerned. But it was a very vibrant place with lots of different activities going on, and it was much more than just rides. It was a whole entertainment, sensory, theatrical experience. And the Phillips didn't have any real interest in occupational health and safety. There was no net. So if you hit the concrete, it was your problem. You better make sure your HPA was up to date, because they weren't paying for anything. That was their attitude, or their attitude in those days. They were certainly men not to be trifled with, because they were from the Wild West, literally coming from Washington State in the US. They came from the Northwest. And there was one incident, I believe, again in the 30s, when one night a hapless, ill-advised would-be bandit decided to hold the place up when they were doing the day's count, and pulled a gun on one of them who was doing the count in the office, not knowing that one of the other brothers was wandering around outside with a handgun, and promptly engaged in some target practice from behind on the would-be bandit. So he wasn't doing any more hold-ups after that, apparently. I guess they were typically American in that respect, that they shot first and asked questions later.
John Powell is descended from a family of carnies, performers and stuntmen who worked at Luna Park from the 1930s to the 1960s.
Well, my grandfather Perce, they came from the Maryborough region of central Victoria. Now his brother Lou, he worked for Palais Picture Theatre Group for 30 years. So he was heavily involved in Luna Park, and he was a performer. He did stunts, and he had a pet monkey named Joan, who the local kids used to love and always, think, oh, there he is, sort of thing. Uncle Lou's mother used to knit dolls over, and she used to use a beer bottles as the shape, and she knit dolls for the prizes in the various attractions at Luna Park. And then there was my Uncle Leo. Now Leo worked in the admin part of Luna Park, and there was a story that all the local traders would race to the bank in the morning to get ahead of that bloody Leo pal, because he'd come with so many pennies from the penny arcade that it took hours for him to count. So if you were stuck behind him in the queue, you were there for quite a while. And eventually the bank got onto this and let Leo in early. And also Uncle Leo met his wife through this bank situation, because she'd be waiting in the queue and she'd try her best to get there before him, but somehow he always got in before her and kept her there and obviously chatted her up and, eventually got married. Uncle Lou took the Luna Park elephant into the city and posted a letter at the GPO, which caused a lot of trouble with the local law, because I don't think there was any laws about elephants at those stage, so they couldn't really do anything because, what can they do?
They used to do some strange things in those days to get people in and to keep the place relevant and interesting from season to season. And one of the things they did in about the mid-30s was they got a couple of live tiger sharks, I believe. I think they came up from Hastings. And they put them in a tank, and these days that would be frowned upon, and so it should be. But in those days it was considered acceptable.
Well, they did have sharks at Luna Park because Uncle Lou bought them, tried to catch them in Port Phillip Bay but wasn't successful, and went to Sydney and got a professional fisherman, and they caught these sharks, put them in a tank so the water had to be pumped all the way around them all the time, and put it on a boat and brought it down to Melbourne and set up sharks at Luna Park in this big tank. And of course there's the rumour that one of the sharks escaped, I'm not quite sure how it did it, but it escaped and ended up in the river tunnel.
Everything went well until one morning they came in and they discovered that one of the prize exhibits had eaten the other exhibit. He'd taken a huge chunk out of the side of the other tiger shark. So not to be deterred, they wired up the dead shark onto a sort of a ratchet thing and were hauling it round the tank. Thankfully it was pretty murky water, so they were able to get away with this stunt. But the old sort of carnival people would really stoop to anything if there was $1 involved.
The park was one of their many contributions to Melbourne, including cinemas such as the Palais Theatre next door.
My first memories of being down at the Palais was just as a young toddler being walked down there from West St Kilda, where we lived, and travelling back on my father's shoulders after a show. My mother and father had permanent bookings at the Palais on a Saturday night. Big deal then, to be in the lounge, or the loge as they were called, 5 shillings a seat. But certainly the Palais for me was the mecca of entertainment, although of course the Melbourne cinema scene was prolific in those days. There were literally hundreds of cinemas prior to television, but the Palais was really the jewel in the crown. A wonderful cinema, not only for films but also for its stage shows.
The Palais Theatre was not only one of the most important cinemas, it was one of the most important live music venues, stage venues in Australia. And when you look at all the big stars that came in there, Bob Hope, the Rolling Stones, Tom Jones, it was a very important venue.
It's hard to get your head around the fact that these days you go and see a movie or 2 features plus a stage show. Now, how they managed that economically, I don't know, because the tickets were no dearer than at any other cinema, at the Victory along the way, or the Memorial Hall, or wherever. The seats were still the same, as I say, 5 shillings on a Saturday night. It's hard to compare now with today's prices, but quite amazing to see a stage show with Harry Jacobs and the Palais Orchestra and a full production show, not just an orchestra on the stage, but a full production show, which ran, I suppose, about 40 minutes. How they fitted it all in, I don't know, but they did.
Bruce Patience's grandfather came to Australia with the Phillips brothers to assist in building the Big Dipper and other iconic rides.
He joined Luna Park in 1922 or early 23. He came from the UK originally. He was born in the 1890s, and like a lot of young men born at that time, he had the misfortune to find himself fighting in the First World War. So he spent 4 years in France and Belgium. Finished that, went back to the UK and set off on what you'd really call a travel odyssey. We just started travelling, and about a year or so later he found himself in California, working around amusement parks for whatever reason. So he found himself working at, I think, the Ocean View Park in Los Angeles. Ocean View or Venice Beach, one of those. They're both gone now. And it just happened that while he was there, one of the Phillips brothers happened to be back in the US. They were in the process. They were about to rebuild Luna Park in Melbourne. And I guess they were looking for new ideas and perhaps new people. And they just made a casual offer that if he wanted to make his way down to the South Pacific, which I don't think he'd really thought about, that there might be some fairly well-paid work for him at Luna Park. He worked initially on the installation and the construction of all those things like the Big Dipper, the whip. Later on he worked on the ghost train, installing the ghost train. A lot of those iconic rides that went on for years and years.
The Palais de Folies, later the Giggle Palace, already held its famous distorting mirrors and slippery dips.
Giggle Palace!
When you went into the Giggle Palace, the floors that moved and the rubber hoses you had to wend your way through.
The giant slides, just terrific. Straight ones for the youngies, really bumpy ones for the oldies. Because most of the people that went to Luna Park, the entertainment was for the little kids or the big kids. And by big kids, I'd say up to about 25 years of age.
And the slides where you sat on a Hessian bag and just the joy of going down and down and down and down and down and bouncing down onto the cushions at the bottom.
Funny mirrors. We all loved the funny mirrors. Made you fat, made you thin, made you tall, gave you a wide mouth, whatever. Just terrific.
Down there you could go and stand in front of a mirror and you could split your sides.
Yeah.
Because the mirror said, look how wide you are. Oh, we never heard of anything so fascinating in our lives.
In the front of the Giggle Palace there was a little man in a glass cage, and he'd come and giggle and do a little bit of magic or a little bit of juggling or something like that.
The Giggle Palace had a glass stage area where a clown used to perform, we call them shift twice a shift, which was a 4-hour shift. He'd do 10-15 minutes, curtains ago, and he'd go back and come back again for another performance.
It was to give you more value for money. Yeah. So if you were poor, that's what you needed. The ticket to variety.
Of course, we guys liked it when we took our girlfriends, because they had these wind drafts from underneath and the dresses would jump up. And there's the turkey trot to keep your balance and a big revolving barrel where the big kids could starlight go a whole 360, as us little tuckers just mucked around on the floor as we got tumbled with the turn of the barrel.
Like a whole church full of people who look as though they've found half a mouse in their cellar roll. I don't know what's wrong with people, you know what I mean? I mean, I'm in enough trouble as it is, but you see, I can still try to see the funny side of it. I have to. But it's still going, that lovely Luna Park. Why don't I go down there now?
Pretty amazing.
Maybe I wouldn't fit in the seats.
The park closed for the First World War.
In those days, it was what do you call it? It was, I suppose, it was a cure for negative thoughts, which we had in spades. We had negative thoughts. So I remember going down there, and I remember the big face, and I remember the ha 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 ha. See, maybe people with all the sophistication in the world now would wrap around in 3D. Oh, you must see it's in 3D. Well, Luna Park's in 3D, isn't it? You know what I mean?
It reopened in 1923 as New Luna Park, with the Whip, the Water Chute, Noah's Ark, and the supreme thrill machine, the Big Dipper.
Now, the Big Dipper was really a wonderful roller coaster. It was so exciting and so forward in its day. Where the Scenic Railway was renowned worldwide as being one of the best in the world of its style, he was something quite new and innovative.
After the children's Saturday matinee, in between the matinee and the evening performance, before we went out for dinner, I would go down there and I would sit on the front of the Scenic Railway or the front of the Big Dipper, just time after time after time after time. It was just amazing.
Andrei Dubrovin fancied himself as a Frank Sinatra crooner. He cut his first record at Luna Park at a While You Wait booth several decades ago.
I went to one evening to the Festival Hall in North Melbourne, and Frank Sinatra was on, and I'm a great fan of Frank Sinatra, and got very enthusiastic about the whole thing. And being a sort of bit of frustrated singer even in those days, at the moment I'm still singing in a choir and try to pretend. So I thought I'd make my own record. So down at Luna Park, I knew there was a recording place where they did it immediately on the spot recordings on the old black 78s. And there was a fella there that I'd seen before. He was a blind gentleman, and his wife, who the counter, who sort of looked after the counter, and he looked after the technical side of things. And I decided to put down my record of a Frank Sinatra song, and we did a two-sided thing, and I came out very proudly after that with my own record, and but I don't think I ever played it to anyone else. Really, it wasn't that sort of good when I heard it. There was no backing or anything, and but anyway, I was rather proud of myself having cut my own record at the time. She gets too hungry for dinners at 8. She likes the theatre but never comes late. She never bothers with people she hates. That's why the lady is a tramp. I'm not the thing. No, forget it. Okay, forgot it. Thank you.
The Philadelphia Toboggan Company's War and Peace Carousel moved from Sydney with its extraordinary chariots, cherubs, 6,000 lights and 68 horses. The carousel was enclosed in a giant birthday cake for Luna Park's Silver Jubilee in 1937. In 1926, the first Dodgems ride in Australia opened in the Dodgem Pavilion on the first floor of the Games Arcade building. And in 1934, the Ghost Train was installed, a dark ride from the Pretzel Amusement Ride Company of New Jersey.
All aboard! We dare you to ride on the Ghost Train!
A While You Wait studio from the ingenious Whitney brothers took your photograph in planes or cars or just sitting on fair lunar crescent.
The most exciting thing for me at Luna Park was the fact that we came in, and just here on the left there was a photograph of an aeroplane. We'd never been on an aeroplane, and there was a gangplank that you walked up to this photograph and you stood there, and I have a photograph of my sister and my cousin John standing there looking as though we were going to board the plane. And that for me was the most exciting aspect of Luna Park, because I'd never been on a plane, and the photograph made it look like we were on a plane.
We were all dressed up, and Dad was dressed up, and it looked like the aeroplane sort of ready to go off. And I seem to have some touch of a memory of him wanting to send these photos overseas to his family, and I think he just wanted to send pictures of us and him ready to go off on a plane, because a plane was a big thing, you know. They came on a boat, and doing an aeroplane flight was something really quite expensive, and you know, you had to be reasonably prosperous to do it.
The father of twin sisters Faye and Annie owned the Savoy Cake Shop in Ackland Street, today Le Bon.
He made the baking, did all the baking, and my mother helped in the shop serving, and we used to just sort of wander around. You know, we couldn't hang around the shop all the time, so we used to go to the beach or we sort of explored the area really.
It did become a very social sort of area for Jewish kids, young Jewish families, and it became, there was the nickname Little Jerusalem, and it used to be a meeting place, and was always packed. You could get, and you had a lot of the young fellas. There were little groups of them too that were sort of showing off their biceps, I guess, and doing acrobats and things,
true, yes.
And trying to impress the women, young girls.
When the Phillips brothers built their amusement area in St Kilda, there was no Italian community, there was no Greek community, the war hadn't even begun. And of course after that we had the influx of what we now have as a mix in Australia, and have benefited from a wonderful immigration situation, I think, where before Australians were just eating meat pies.
It was unique in Melbourne in that respect. There was no other place where you could go in and it didn't matter who you were there with everybody else, just either getting scared, having fun, winning something, going to a competition, chucking your dodgem car into somebody else.
Well, St Kilda streets, particularly Ackland Street and the Village Bell, was very cosmopolitan. That sort of atmosphere that now exists, I suppose, to a certain extent in places like Brunswick and Fitzroy and other areas, didn't exist. It was a standalone situation down there in St Kilda, brought about, I suppose, by the immigrants of the area who brought their culture. I mean, who could pass a cake shop without... It's a wonder everybody wasn't out there. But that sort of culture hadn't existed before.
A lot of people that come to Luna Park from Melbourne and overseas, but from Melbourne, their personality changes as soon as they hit Luna Park. It's like they've got permission to be naughty, to have fun, to get a bit pissed, to maybe find a bit of sex, to maybe meet somebody, to have too much ice cream.
Uncle Roy used to work at Noah's Ark. He used to have the torch and go around and find the couples that were canoodling in the dark.
I think it was a bit of a meeting ground really, but you didn't know who you were really meeting. That was the thing.
The domes in Luna Park, making it majestic. It's like really paying respect to having fun. They've gone out of their way, they've built a monument to the notion of letting your hair down, having fun, showing your knickers, getting tipsy. It's that whole thing that St Kilda has always been to people. It's a monument to all that.
Down through the years, Luna Park has fired the imaginations of a score of artists, including Sidney Nolan and Albert Tucker.
That's a very traditional sort of study of Luna Park and the palais from foreshore. There are the headlights of cars doing the beat on Port Ormond, the top of the face down there. And it's only got red lights, St Kilda. At night time, St Kilda changes nature at night time. It becomes an out and out good time city.
Artist Charles Brain was mesmerised by the insane laughing of the Giggle Palace's King Cole, So he built a replica to play in his own home.
I grew up in St Kilda, so I've always sort of been fascinated by Luna Park. Something about me was captivated by that, by the fantasy that still existed there. And then I found a photo of old King Cole in the Giggle Palace, and you know, a lot of people would write in blogs and talk about this crazy laugh that was of this looping, laughing track. Me having the creative thumb, thought I'd make a reincarnation because I found him quite an intriguing character, I guess, and the character as well. In storybooks, he's a bit of a drunk and he's a bit of a lush, so he likes to drink, and I think he could be a little bit of a player as well. I guess he gets his own way because he's the king. And he laughs about everything because he doesn't have to take anything seriously because he's the king and everyone's beholden to him.
Everybody.
I used to like the rotor where you stuck to the edge. That was, it went round and centrifugal force or whatever would have you pinned to the sides.
I too am frightened of the scenic railway, and the more I know about it, the more frightened I become. This doesn't stop me riding it, of course. But the scenic railway, of course, is such a triumph of engineering, basic, direct, simple engineering, and the fact that it has run safely for almost 100 years indicates that although it's scary to ride, it's not actually life-threatening. So yeah, the scenic railway is up there on the top of the list.
Would have to be the Big Dipper.
So I was always being something of a chicken. I was always more partial to the gentler rides. The River Coast was always a favourite of mine, and the Big Dipper. Sadly, both of them have gone now. But as far as what's down there these days, the Ghost Train is looking great. That's been a perennial favourite. I mean, that's been going since the 30s. And of course, the great old Scenic Railway. Still going around and round, but it's been taking people for 100 years.
Big Dipper.
Yeah.
The Big Dipper.
Big Dipper.
See?
Yeah.
And I don't think we had one of them things that went up and back again and we all threw up and all that. No. I don't think they had those. It wouldn't have mattered in those days because if we threw up we wouldn't have been throwing anything up because we were starving.
For me it's the carousel. I mean the restoration and work they've done on the carousel is absolutely fantastic. And I would actually take people who visited St Kilda and I would take them to Luna Park to see the carousel because I think it's fantastic.
And of course the rotor, where you got to see girls' knickers, was it was like, oh, whoa! For an innocent little boy, it was like, oh, you know, just seeing girls' knickers. And of course all the boys at the top of the rotor just peering out down over. Yeah, the Ferris wheel I like. I remember Michael Gadinsky of Mushroom Records had its 10th birthday party there, and I have great fond memories of riding on the Ferris wheel up to the top with a young lady, and well, it was very good. I enjoyed that. So the Ferris wheel was good.
I'm a scaredy cat with heights, so even though I love the look of the Scenic Railway, I have to be really worked on to go on it. But I love the Scenic Railway. I just love looking at it, its shape, and at the different times of day, the way the light, you know, falls, shadows. Scenic Railway, I guess, is my most beloved structure.
I think it has to be the Scenic Railway. I do like that.
Oh, and the Dodgems, of course, that's right. Oh, yeah. Because in those days you could really bump the cars and you wouldn't get into too much trouble. Yes.
As an adult, I think probably I love the Scenic Railway or the Big Dipper. As a grandparent, I love the carousel.
I think I'm probably biased in saying it's the carousel. Look, it's spectacular. There's nothing like it in Australia. It's the largest carousel, it's the most elaborate here. It was an important carousel for the Philadelphia Bottling Company, being a 4-row, big one.
Scenic Railway.
And the riverboat, which was incredibly scary as a little kid. It was just really, I don't know, it was thrilling. It was a great thrill.
And of course you can't forget the fairy floss and the waffles. Oh, waffles to die for. It was just an amazing place.
We were down there one day in about 1968, 69 perhaps. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And one of the old rides was giving trouble. It was playing up, and he started talking to the maintenance guy and said, well, no, you've got to pull those gears out and change that and then slam them together, because this machine was always a problem. I think it was a whip. And the guy said, well, you seem to know a lot about this. And he said, well, I should, because I built it in 1923. And the guy said, well, look, we're about to close in half an hour or so. Could you possibly come back and just have a look at it? Which he did. So I went back with him. This was on a hot summer's night. There was only myself, my grandfather, and whoever the maintenance person was from Luna Park. Anyway, he got this thing fixed and up and running, and the guy said to him, is there anything, do you want to get paid for all this? He said, no, but he said, my grandson would get a big kick out of just going on some of the rides after hours by himself. So at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock on a summer's night, I had the huge privilege of going around the Big Dipper and the Scenic Railway by myself, which was quite a thrill. It made you feel very special as a young kid too. That was real power, for an 8-year-old kid in the 60s in Melbourne.
I can remember one time I was driving the Scenic Railway and we were going through the towers, and this particular gentleman jumped out from the towers claiming he was Spider-Man. So if you can imagine, you go through the towers of the top driving and you're not expecting to see anybody but the people in the carriages, and this guy jumps out. It was a bit frightening.
Oh, he was not in the carriage.
No. It turned out he climbed up the outside of the facade and jumped out in front of the carriage, and we stopped and got him and took him down, and they took him away, and he was institutionalised for a while, and he did it again.
There was this ghost called the Joker, who appeared exactly as a Joker appears in a deck of cards. And he used to appear at all the most unlikely times. He'd pop up next to people on the River Caves boat, or there was one memorable occasion where he sprung up in mid-air in a carriage on the Ferris wheel. And whether it was real or not, I don't know, but my grandfather did tell me that one night when he was closing the park, there was definitely, he said, there was definitely something or someone running around the top of the River Caves diorama. If you remember, the old River Caves diorama used to have polar bears and mountains and all that sort of thing. And he said there was definitely this face peeping out from behind these things and running off. And he got up there to say, you really have to get out, the place is closed. And he said, when I got up there was nothing there. But he said, I swear that there was something there.
Tragically, on the 27th of November 1981, the Giggle Palace and Games Arcades were lost to fire. The Rota closed in 1977 after 26 years. The Big Dipper closed in 1989 and River Caves closed in 1979 after safety concerns. the heritage face and towers, carousel, former Dodgem Pavilion, ghost train and scenic railway have all experienced restoration in recent years. From 1998, Brian Atkins assisted in the restoration of one of Australia's most recognised icons, after the remnants of the original Mr. Moonface were discovered under concrete layers from the 1960s.
The original face was a simple wooden frame covered with chicken wire and hessian and plastered. Very simple production. Over the years it had been repaired constantly with more and more plastering and concrete rendering. But eventually the combined weight of all that repair and render was about to tip the whole thing onto its face into the street, and it was on the verge of collapse. We had some discussions. We were doing some work at Luna Park, and the question arises, what are we going to do about this thing? How can we preserve it? So the decision was making to chip off 6 or 7 tons of concrete render that was on the face, expose the original face, record the original face, and make a fiberglass shell identical to the original face and place it over the top with a new steel framework behind it. So the face would be solid, it would be absolutely like the original, but it would be maintenance free and last who knows how many years. Then you start to negotiate with the interested body. Friends of Luna Park, Heritage Victoria, the National Trust, Conservation Architects, the Management Group, the City Council, the State Government, all of whom have a different photograph, all of whom have exactly the right reasons for wanting to rebuild the face, but none can quite agree what it looks like. In the end, from our models, a sculptor was commissioned to produce a clay model. And that clay model came along to 2 or 3 meetings, and everybody had the opportunity to lay the hand on the clay model and push it up a bit, push it back a bit, put a wrinkle in it, take a wrinkle out, change the nose a little bit, till eventually everyone stood around the model and finally agreed by consensus, yes, that's what it should look like. What we had to start with, of course, was the remnants of 100 years of neglect. Somehow the trains that were running have been repaired or partly repaired or substituted, bits have been cannibalised, and the whole exercise had just been to keep them running. So when we started, there were no drawings, there were no standards, there was no agreement between us and the operators about how it ought to work, how it really ought to work. So we rebuilt one just by the seat of our pants from what we could see in front of us. And then we created a whole set of drawings which standardised how any future ones would be done. Building the second one was more straightforward, and we could focus more on the quality and the technical aspects of making it last a long time and making it solid and secure. The train has a bogie at the front and a bogie at the back, 2 carriages. And this is the centre bogie, the set of wheels that runs in the middle. The turntable on the back of the front train sits there. The front of the back train sits behind it, and the brakeman sits on this seat between them. The only scenic railway left in the world which has a riding brakeman to control the speed and to control the safe operation of the train.
In 1998, Well-known artist and children's book author Lee Hobbs chose the brilliant historic colours of red, pink, yellow, light and darker blues and white to repaint the Indian Mughal-style towers.
The generation that put that park together had a certain sort of aesthetic when it came to fun fairs and carousels and circuses that was consistent. And it meant that everything they designed sort of fitted in. I lived in St Kilda and was wandering around the park one day, about 20 years ago, and I'd worked in the mid-70s in Sydney's Luna Park on that restoration, built some sculptures and did the merry-go-round colours, and bumped into a bloke who, while I was looking at the merry-go-round here, who said, oh, there's a group called Friends of Luna Park. So there was a meeting that night, and I went and I met Julia Murray, and through that got involved with the group. And because I'd had experience with the park in Sydney, I think, through a series of whatever, I ended up doing the colour scheme for the entrance towers. So what I did is I started off with basically red, introduced yellow and blue, and so that they wouldn't be too over the top, I softened it so there's the bright red and there's the pale pink to soften that down. There's the bright yellow and the pale blue. I think a wonderful thing about colour is that a good colour scheme in any context, with me anyway, it sort of sparks you up, and I think that's what the whole park is. It's about sparking you up and taking you somewhere else. No point painting the towers greys and dark greens, because I think the colour scheme also should say this is something that isn't like anywhere else. It's not normal world. I think originally the idea of those fun parks was come in here and we'll transport you somewhere that's good.
In 1989, I was living in St Kilda and I saw the Big Dipper being pulled down, big cranes, and I was shocked and really horrified because it had just been part of the landscape of my childhood. I'd had fantastic times there when I was young, and I didn't know what the current situation was at Luna Park, but seeing that happen made me try and find out what was happening. By exploring, I saw that the whole interior of the park was really run down and grim looking, and furthermore my sister, who's no longer alive, who was a terrific drawer and painter, was going along with another friend who taught drawing, Marie Woolley, to the park just to draw the merry-go-round. And my sister was really concerned about the fact that most of the horses were missing legs, ears, sometimes heads, whole horses were missing, but the whole thing was in a really bad state. And my sister was told at the time by one of the staff, oh, it's vandals who've broken the legs, when in fact we later learned it was deliberate neglect. The crankshafts in the mechanism weren't being greased. They'd snap, the horses would drop, and the legs would be broken off. My sister, who was pretty ill, was getting back into her artwork after a long period away from it, and I thought it might be a great idea to promote the dilapidated state of Luna Park by putting on an exhibition of her work, her drawings of the merry-go-round, along with Marie Woolley, our friend who was an art teacher who was also drawing the merry-go-round. And I put on an exhibition of their work and another friend, a photographer, John Bannigan's, at Lyndon, and we got great publicity for that exhibition, and a lot of people came. We had a register inviting people to sign it and provide their contact details if they cared about the state of Luna Park, and many hundreds of people gave their details, one of whom was Patricia Mullins and another one was Rowan Story. And Rowan worked with me subsequently to apply for heritage listing. Patricia subsequently was the wonderful restoration artist who did the incredible job.
Back in 93, 94, the carousel horses were in a dreadful state. Some were under the Scenic Railway, others, we had about 2 that were missing, 4 that didn't have heads. And so the search was on to find those parts if possible, which we did find most of them. For me, the challenge was researching the carousel, finding out how beautiful it was when it was new, and understanding that scheme, that colour scheme, and what the original intention of the manufacturer, Philadelphia Petroleum Company, was. I wanted to return the carousel to its original 1913 appearance, and that was a crusade.
Oh, the centrepiece, and it was fantastic when it was restored. You know, we used to get numerous wedding parties come in just to get their photos taken on the carousel when it was in the rundown condition that it got to. I think I can remember there was probably an 18-month period where it didn't go, and the park just didn't have the same atmosphere with the carousel music and the carousel even running round in the condition that it went down to. And it's great that it's up and running, and the fact that the way it looks now.
We actually got the CSIRO to do paint scrapes, paint analyses on the horses to try and determine if the original colour scheme was still visible. The horses had been originally painted in real gold leaf and incredibly intricate individual colour schemes, and that's what in the 90s was restored by Patricia.
Every horse is unique in its trappings and the way it's been carved. This one is the only one with all of these flowers carved down the side, and is the Peace Chariot horse. The other one, there are two of them, but this one is probably the most elaborately carved on the carousel, and it's a great favourite too.
There were conservators who came down from Sydney who worked on 68 horses, sometimes with 23 layers of house paint, having to all be carefully chipped away. Big job to get down to the original paint and not remove it so they could have the evidence of what it was. I remember once we found a beautiful little bunch of violets painted on the saddle cloth, just so sweet and so telling.
I did the body painting on every horse on the carousel, which is the colouring here, and a lot of the repainting here. All of the flowers that recreate, even the little tendrils here, were in the photographs that we had of this particular horse dating from 1913, and that's all of those little details I really wanted to recreate. It's part of who this horse is. In a way, to bring them to repaint in the original scheme is like saying hello to this horse again. Because this, for me, this is how it's meant to be.
The new consortium that's presently running Luna Park expressed wishes for it to be exactly the way it was 40 or 50 years ago, or maybe even longer. And as part of that process, they've been out finding as many parts as they can to some of the rides which no longer exist, and the Giggle Palace is the prime example. And the River Caves is another example, where there's been quite a bit of research and quite a bit of money spent on gathering together some of the original parts which have become spread around the country. We have quite a number of components out of the original Giggle Palace the drums that people walk through, the moving walkways that people walk over, the air blast devices that were designed in the days when ladies used to wear skirts to blow up ladies' skirts. So there's quite a bit of that engineering now sitting here that's been recovered from various places, and there is a constant lookout for more pieces to come together so that some original concept work can be done to put it together as a whole project again.
It's mad. That's my favourite part about Luna Park. It's mad.
Personally, enjoyment, and for the public, pleasure, I think.
Luna Park, survival.
The mere fact that it survived for 100 years is extraordinary testament to its timeless quality and the fact that it was a great idea to begin with from a marketing viewpoint. When J.D. Williams, who was the Phillips mentor and partner and the man who essentially got the place up and running, another American, it was a great idea. He got the timing right, it worked well. It's been through a lot of changes, but the fact that it's still there is extraordinary. 100 years later, there wouldn't be many amusement parks in the world that are still going 100 years after they were built. It's a big achievement.
We've had the pleasure of taking our children to Luna Park and they loved it. They were gamer than I was. I loved the merry-go-round and pretty tame rides, but the children would go on everything. And now we're having the pleasure of taking our grandchildren.
People go down there who've had a history, they really enjoyed Luna Park and liked all that about it, and they can reintroduce their children and their grandchildren to it. You see an awful lot of grandparents down there with grandchildren who are down there literally just for fun, to enjoy a whole new experience, and it gives the generations a connection with each other. Grandparents who can take their grandchildren down and talk about how they did their courting there or how they used to go out on a Saturday night. It becomes an important part of family history. So I think the best part for me is when I go down there and see those people down there who've gone down there to enjoy themselves, get reconnected with their children and grandchildren, and just become part of a much more stressless, stress-free society, a way to live.
Oh, Luna Park was a great time in our lives, firstly as children, then later as parents, and now as grandparents.
It's a sort of an iconic place, really, a place where, well, you can sort of immerse yourself in the dreams of the past, I suppose. The beautiful merry-go-round, of course, the Scenic Railway, which is still running strong. It's those sorts of things, I think, that are the glue that holds Luna Park together. You take them away and you're just like any other amusement park.
It gives a lot of people a focus on how cities ought to look after their assets, and even people who aren't really funfair people see Luna Park as an important part of the cityscape and an important part of what the government should be and the various authorities should be preserving, rather than allowing it to just all wash away for a block of apartments.
I met Trish there, and Trish and I were married under the mouth and had our reception in Luna Park in a marquee with all the rides going.
It's always been Melbourne's private fantasy world, really. It's been a place where it's been a companion to people over the years. It's been a place where the people of Melbourne have gone throughout some of the worst times in their life to seek relief, and it's always done that. I think Luna Park has been a friend. I think that's what it really comes down to. I think it's been a great friend.
For 4 generations of Australians, Luna Park in St Kilda has always been just for fun. It has cheered us up through war, depression, natural and even personal disasters. allowing children of each generation to experience some of the same hysterical laughter of the previous ones. But Luna Park is not just a heritage treasure. It's good for the soul of Melbourne.
Presents matinees on Saturdays and holidays. Goodbye now from Luna Park, just for fun.